In this video, I'll tell you about my favorite piece of hobby tech that I recently acquired and why I like it. It's been just over a year since the last Why I Like It video, but this one came about due to my extreme satisfaction with the product. Every previous edition of this video series has focused on a game or a line of miniatures or something like that, but this video focuses on a piece of tech that is frequently used for hobby purposes. However, it can also be used for so much more as well. I'm talking about an FDM 3D printer from Bambu Lab called the A1, and it's really changed my wargaming hobby for the better. I think I first heard about the Bambu Lab printers at Gen Con 2023, so about a year and a half ago. I was in the Monster Fight Club booth, looking around and stuff like that, and they had this huge container ship piece of terrain that they were running games of Cyberpunk Red Combat Zone on top of. And I mean, it was really big. Kind of reminded me of the G.I. Joe carrier, back in the day, the USS Flag that, many of us Gen X folks wanted when we were kids. Never got it, of course, but it was massive, right? And where would you keep it? And the cost. Do you think your parents are made out of money? So I asked John, the president of Monster Fight Club, if this was something that they were going to be selling, kind of jokingly, because it was so huge. And yes, they do sell it as digital files. He told me that some of it needs to be cut on a laser cutter, the big flat parts and stuff like that, which makes sense. And the other parts needed to be printed on a 3D printer. And so I pointed at some of the parts on the model in front of me and asked, resin? And he responded, nope, filament from a Bambu Lab printer. I was stunned because the parts didn't look like filament prints that I was used to at the time. When I got back home from Gen Con 2023, I started doing a bit of internet research on the products from Bambu Lab. I also talked to friends of mine that, are into the 3D printing scene, and I started hearing the praises of the new Bambu Lab FDM printers. Very fast, very easy to use, and reasonably priced. And they produced pieces that were really smooth as well. Usually filament printers have these kind of layer lines that are pretty easy to spot, but the prints that I was seeing come out of these Bambu Lab printers were really pretty smooth. When filament 3D printing first kind of started out, I was interested because, well, A, because, I'm into gadgets, I'm kind of a gadget nerd, and B, I figured I could make some really cool terrain stuff with a 3D printer. Scratch building terrain is fun, but there's some part of my brain that loves the idea of designing a piece of terrain in software, being able to put everything exactly where you want it, make everything the right size, and do all that kind of stuff, and then just print it out. It's the same reason I prefer doing digital drawing to traditional drawing and digital photography to film photography. I've done both drawing and photography non-digitally in the past because it was the only option available when I started, but I prefer digital. However, when filament printers first came out, they were pretty fiddly. You had to fight with the build plate where the filament got attached, the little nozzle and squirts it down on there. Sometimes the stuff didn't want to stick to it unless you used, tape or hairspray to make it adhere. Other times it'd stick too well, and then it'd be really hard to get off the plate without kind of ruining the print. Bigger prints especially took forever, and if you let it run and didn't keep an eye on it, you might come back later to find that the print had screwed up hours ago and just kind of kept running though, making a huge spaghetti mess of wasted filament. Companies started making third-party add-ons for filament printers to address some of these issues, like magnetic build plates that you could then remove and then flex to pop the parts off of the plates, kind of like cracking an ice cube tray rather than sitting and scraping at it with a plastic putty knife. Or, webcams that would watch the print as it goes so that you could check in on the progress and maybe catch mistakes earlier and not waste so much time and filament. But there was still a lot of fiddling to get decent 3D prints, and I just wasn't that interested in too much fiddling. I honestly wanted something that was a bit more plug and play. And the more research I did into Bambu Lab printers, the more glowing reviews I came across from both friends and strangers online. Earlier this spring, I finally decided that I wanted a Bambu Lab printer, but I wasn't sure exactly which one. They make about like half a dozen different models, and they all have different features, but mostly all print at the same quality. After asking all kinds of people, including Hank, one of the guys who runs Adepticon and has a printer farm in his basement for just printing Adepticon terrain, I finally decided on the A1. Just to be perfectly clear here, I bought the A1 with my own money. They didn't send me one for free or even for cheap or anything like that. This video isn't sponsored by Bambu Lab or anyone else for that matter. I also don't have any kind of affiliate link or anything like that, so if you end up buying one, I hope that you enjoy it, but know that I'm not getting any kind of kickback or anything for it. The A1 is one of their cheaper offerings with a base price of $400, and sometimes it's on sale, depends on time of year, that kind of thing. But it works great, especially for doing terrain pieces. Now, I'm only planning on using a type of filament called PLA, or polylactic acid, which seems to be kind of the easy mode of filaments. Because I don't plan on using any of the weirder filaments like ABS or anything like that, I didn't feel like I needed one of the enclosed printer models like the P1 series printers. The A1 seemed to tick all the boxes for what I was looking for, mainly printing terrain in PLA. I ordered it from their website and got the printer pretty quickly and decided to open it up and put it together one Friday afternoon after my Twitch stream on Friday mornings. I was kind of hoping that it wasn't going to be too difficult or take too long to set up because my wife and I had dinner plans that evening. And so I started maybe around 2 o'clock or 2:30, somewhere in there. From the time that I cut the first piece of tape on the shipping box to the time of having a fully printed Benchy, which is kind of the name of the little boat model that people print out to benchmark their printers, that was just under an hour from cutting tape to popping that Benchy off of the magnetic doohickey there. There were a few screws that had to, be screwed into the machine and a few wires that needed to be plugged in and stuff like that, but otherwise setup was incredibly simple. So like I said, after I set it up, screwed everything together and all that kind of stuff, I turned it on, ran a calibration, loaded the filament, and started printing the Benchy, as I mentioned. It's already in the printer's memory. You can just get to it from the little screen on there, and it's already got one in there, so you can just print that one. And Benchy printed in 20 minutes. If you've ever seen older filament printers print, right, Bambu Lab's printers move much, much faster. That makes printing happen faster, so you don't have to wait so long to get your parts either. However, even though the print head is moving quicker, the print itself is more accurate with the, auto calibration and auto flow control and all that other kind of cool tech that they put into the printers, which helps to make a smoother print with fewer layer lines. That weekend, I started printing nearly constantly, all kinds of terrain stuff, general sci-fi buildings and Star Wars themed terrain STLs that I'd had on a hard drive for a good long time, and even some cool fantasy buildings too, like this ruined sorcerer tower from Printable Scenery that I bought and printed, but haven't, gotten to paint yet. It's primed, but that's as far as I've gotten so far. Understand this, if you get a Bambu Lab printer, you could find it very easy to print tons and tons of terrain quite quickly, but you'll possibly build up a backlog of terrain and then end up painting that terrain potentially all winter. Take my word for it. Bambu Lab has some amazing features as standard, like the magnetic flex plate that I mentioned before, for popping the plates, the prints off the plate, and a built-in webcam, like I also mentioned before, to keep an eye on your stuff, plus amazing software that makes printing really easy. In the olden days, you had to figure out which slicer software you wanted to use to turn your STL files, the 3D shapes that you buy from, My Manufacturing and places like that, into what's called G-code, which is the kind of raw instructions to the printer on how to move the parts of the machine to make all the printing happen. Go over here this far and then turn this way and squirt out the stuff and all that kind of jazz, right? Once you had your G-code, generated, you'd usually have to put that file on a flash drive and then go and then plug it into the printer so that you could then tell it to print. Not Bambu Lab. With the Bambu Studio software, you place your STL parts on the virtual build plate, in software in that piece of software, and then you tell it to slice the parts. It does so, gives you any kind of error messages like for overhangs and stuff like that so that you can then automatically add in supports to support those things so that it doesn't collapse when it's printing and all that kind of jazz. And then once you're all ready, it's time to print. Rather than putting G-code on a flash drive, you just send the job to the printer via Wi-Fi, and it just starts printing. My HP color laser printer upstairs hasn't done that in years. The Bambu Lab printer then auto-calibrates and it does some other initial stuff to get ready, and then eventually you get a notification on your phone, if you've downloaded the Bambu Studio app as well, and to tell you that it's done, and then you have yourself a finished piece. I printed a lot over the course of about a month. 3 kilos of filament, which means 3 of those entire spindles that you've seen probably, of PLA. Not one bad print. Until the problem. On the 4th spindle, as I started printing stuff off that 4th spindle, I started having an issue. It wouldn't feed the filament, and I couldn't get anything to print properly. I checked their troubleshooting website, which is actually quite helpful, and kind of discovered the issue. As it turns out, humidity is bad for the filament in 3D printers, which I did not know. And July in Wisconsin can be, pretty humid. Since I was just kind of keeping the filament, the spindle on the machine between prints, just being like, well, I'll print next week, and it just sits there, the filament was swelling from the humidity microscopically. So this causes the getting stuck through the machine as it goes through there. And as it turns out, it is actually best to unload the filament from the printer as soon as you get done printing a project or whatever, and put it into one of those giant Ziploc baggies, like the 2.25 gallon ones that you get from the grocery store. And then you throw a whole bunch of those do not eat desiccant packs in there to sort of suck the moisture out. I got some huge desiccant packs on Amazon, and they work great. I throw one of those in there with a spindle, zip it up, and then I haven't had any problems since. Just leaving the filament on the printer between print jobs, it's not great for the filament and obviously for the printer as well. I figured out the issue just before Gen Con 2024 this summer, and then I came back from Gen Con with COVID, so I went several more weeks without fixing anything or getting anything running again. When I finally got better and started trying to fix the A1 printer, I ran into some issues. The tech support folks were helpful, but I really wanted to start printing again right away, so I instead just bought another A1 and put the original one in the box from the second one. My thought was that it'd get me printing again ASAP, which was kind of important. I had sort of a thing I was trying to get done. And when I did take the time to fix the first one, then once it was fixed, I'd have 2, so I could print more things at once, or use separate size nozzles on each, the 0.4 millimeter over here and a 0.2 millimeter over there. The machines don't take up very much space at all, so it'd be no problem to run them both in the future. And speaking of the nozzles, I've recently discovered the use of a smaller nozzle to make even finer prints. I printed some spaceships for Battlefront Valkyrie in a recent video, Pachow, with a 0.2 millimeter nozzle, which I purchased from Bambu Labs. It was like $12, instead of the stock 0.4 millimeter one that comes with the printer. And the results are excellent. Now, sure, it takes longer, probably 2 to 3, maybe even 4 times longer depending on your print. But I truly believe that you can print some miniatures very, very well in FDM, not just terrain. And it's way easier to swap nozzles on the A1 printer than it is on the others like the P1s and stuff like that. I'm actually working on a video where I'll have the same model STL printed by my friend in resin, and then I'll also print it in filament on the 0.2 nozzle and all that kind of stuff, and then compare and contrast. So that's the Bambu Lab A1 and why I like it. It's really easy to use, it prints quickly and smoothly, the software is pretty amazing, and you can swap nozzles easily to print even finer pieces, like maybe some actual miniatures, not just terrain. Again, I'm just printing single color PLA filament for terrain and stuff like that right now. If you're planning to use kind of weird filaments in the future, like ABS and PETG and whatnot, then you might want to look at the P1 series instead of the A1 series. Those are also very highly rated. But so far, I've had no negatives with Bambu Lab, and if you keep your filament dry, you probably won't either. Do you already use Bambu Lab printers? Which one is your favorite? Or do you prefer printing on something else? Do you have any good tips or tricks to make filament printing better or easier for everyone? Drop all those answers down there in the comments below. And while you're down there, please deploy some depressmentation of the like button. It really helps out the channel and me as well. I appreciate it. Also, subscribe for free while you're down there with your depressmentation and to see more videos like this one every single Friday. Thanks for watching.